Thank you all for coming out tonight. And this is, I guess this is the ninth convention I've done with Amy Goodman in Democracy Now. And it's always kind of strange when you walk into the convention centers. Today I was just in the Coke or the Pepsi Center. So it's hard to keep all the brands straight. It's sort of like Barack Obama is like a NASCAR now. He's going to have a logo and John McCain is going to wear an American flag, but it's going to be shaped as a Nike swoosh. And they're spending $50 million just in federal money alone on the so-called security operation here. I'm sure many of you who are out the streets today saw just a small portion of it when Ron Kovic led people to the gates and actually blocked access and shut down journalists from going into the convention center to get their 18. They also have a fusion center that they have set up that has representatives of every law enforcement agency in the United States, intelligence agencies in the United States, and all of this is coordinated. In fact, I overheard police officers today identifying some random young guy in the crowd who had a skateboard, and they were obsessing over this one kid, making sure they could get his picture. So a female police officer was coordinating this, and she got these two guys to go around and take photos of some young guy with a skateboard. If I see him, I'll tell them that that's what they were doing. There was sort of a melee that was going on. But the reason I bring all of this up is because what we're seeing here in Denver, and as we are going to see in St. Paul, is a microcosm of how this war operates and how this society operates. The corporations are in total control. The corporations are driving the agenda. When it comes to war and political conventions, there is not a Democratic Party and a Republican Party. There's a corporatist party which represents both of those constituencies. And as much as the rhetoric of the Obama campaign is about hope and change, he put the nail in the coffin of any honesty to that statement when he selected Joe Biden as his running mate. Joe Biden is not just one of those Democrats who now turns around and says, oh, I made a mistake in my vote to authorize the war. Some won't even go that far to admit that their vote was a mistake. But for Biden to simply end his involvement with saying, well, it was a mistake and now I'm going to join Barack and we're going to be critical of the war, is to whitewash his entire history in cheerleading this war. You see, Joseph Biden was the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in 2002. The Democrats were in control of the Senate at the time that the invasion and occupation of Iraq was supposed to be, or supposedly being debated. Now, Joe Biden refused to call any witnesses to testify at those crucial hearings that he chaired that would say anything outside of the parameters that were defined as such. Bomb the hell out of Iraq or bomb them and invade them. Those were the parameters set by Joseph Biden in the Senate. There were some of us that were in contact with former weapons inspector Scott Ritter, as well as the former Deputy Secretary General of the UN, Hans von Spanik, at that time. And we were calling Joe Biden's Foreign Relations Committee and saying to him, you should have Scott Ritter testify in front of this committee to talk about the fabricated allegations that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. You should have Hans von Spanik, 32-year veteran of the UN, who has just returned from Iraq. I was on a speaking tour with him at the time, where he has met in the north of Iraq with Ansar al-Islam guerrillas, the so-called al-Qaeda presence in Iraq. And you know where they were? They were in the US-controlled section of Iraq in the north. And they were reporting skirmishes with Saddam Hussein's military. This was not a radical leftist. This was a 32-year veteran of the United Nations, the former head of the Iraq program for the United Nations, who could have revealed to the American people and the world that when the Bush administration says that there's a connection between Iraq and al-Qaeda, that in fact the only connection is Washington. Washington was the connection between Iraq and al-Qaeda. Biden, and I'm not going to harp on him for a long time, but I will say this about him. Joseph Biden has been in the Senate longer than all but 4 other senators. You tell me what kind of change that represents. To have Joseph Biden, the dean of the Democrats' foreign policy in the Senate, who has pushed for NATO expansion, who has pushed for war against Yugoslavia, who pushed for war against Iraq, and then stamped with a stamp of Senate legitimacy the Bush administration's war. This is the man now who is going to be in Barack Obama's ear all the time in the White House. In fact, Obama slipped up the other day when he introduced him. He said the next president of the United States, Joe Biden. But it's not just Biden. After Barack beat Hillary Clinton in the primary, you saw all of the old guard Democrats, the people that brought us all the wars of the 1990s, all the precursor to the Patriot Act, all of the wars and sanctions, jump over to the Obama team. Madeleine Albright, Tony Lake, Susan Rice. It's the same people who mercilessly punished Iraq for the 8 years that Bill Clinton was president of the United States, when he initiated the longest sustained bombing campaign since Vietnam against the people of Iraq. Presided enthusiastically over a devastating regime of economic sanctions. Signed into law the Iraq Liberation Act that was pushed by the neocons, both Democrat and Republican. These are now the people who are around Obama. And so when we talk about what's at stake in this election, this isn't about one man, and if you believe in him, and if you have hope in him. This is, in Obama's own words, about judgment. And the judgment he has shown is to take this old guard of warmongers and put them front and center of his campaign right now. Now, I'm not sitting here saying, don't vote for Barack or vote for Barack. Cynthia McKinney is here tonight. She's running for president on the Green Party ticket. Ralph Nader is also running as an independent for president. These issues, and I know because I was talking with Cynthia about this today, they go well beyond this election. This election is an important moment in our history, but let's be clear, it is not as important as the broader struggle to end this one-party system in this country that is intent on maintaining empire, on maintaining policies of aggression and invasion, both at home and abroad. I'm talking about New Orleans as one example. They have unleashed these corporate mercenaries around the globe. Yes, in Iraq, where they've killed innocent civilians repeatedly over the years of this occupation, but also armed and dangerous on the streets of New Orleans. Cynthia investigated this, was one of the only Congress people who would investigate Blackwater's involvement in the aftermath of the flooding of New Orleans, where they showed up, not on the orders initially of the Bush administration, but Eric Prince, the radical right-wing Christian owner of Blackwater, bankroller of Bush's campaigns, decided that he was going to send 184 men with M4 assault rifles onto the streets of an American city to, quote, stop looters and confront criminals. Those were the exact words of the Blackwater men that I interviewed on the streets of New Orleans. Now, after being there for a week, the Bush administration gave them a no-bid contract where they billed U.S. taxpayers $950 per Blackwater operative per day in the hurricane zone. Blackwater made $70 million off of Hurricane Katrina. And the definition of their contract, Cynthia got the documents, protect FEMA. Has FEMA even arrived yet in New Orleans? But the mercenaries from Blackwater were there. And it wasn't just Blackwater. All these corporations that made a killing off the occupation of Iraq descended on that city. It was like Baghdad on the bayou. You had the Halliburtons and the DynCorps, and all these companies swooped in on the place. And so I interviewed Barack Obama's senior foreign policy advisor recently, and I was trying to get clear on what Senator Obama's position would be on these companies, because he has been somewhat critical. And they said, well, Senator Obama cannot and will not rule out using Blackwater and other mercenary companies in Iraq. Yeah. The reality is the Republicans could run a head of lettuce for president, and that head of lettuce would be enthusiastically embraced by those people so inclined to vote for lunatics like John McCain and George Bush. They would talk about how head of lettuce is a patriot, head of lettuce is going to lead us, and they managed to find a man who is slightly less charismatic than a head of lettuce to be their actual candidate. But on the flip side of this, I like today when I was talking to Mutulu, to M1 from Dead President, I said to him and Stickman, are you going to vote? And Mutulu started to say no, and then Stickman said, yes, I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote with my struggle. I'm going to vote by being in the streets. I'm going to vote by continuing to be here.